Welcome. I'm Damian Woetzel, director of the Vail Dance Festival, and you're joining Heather Watts and myself for Passing Balanchine On as part of the Vail Dance Festival's digital edition of the festival, special for the summer of 2020. Heather and I are going to have a series of conversations with artists who've been at the Vail Dance Festival over the last years, focusing on how the Balanchine repertory is passed on from generation to generation, and very specifically, from dancer to dancer. And for Heather, who worked so closely with Mr. Balanchine as a Balanchine ballerina, this is a legacy project, and it's also a mentorship project and a curator project. So welcome. So glad to have you with us. Heather, anything you want to set up before we begin?
Well, I think one of the things that's not transparent, to use sort of words of today, is how we grow interested in a dancer and how we have had the great grace and luck and fortune to, and every dancer is a different story. So thinking about today, we're going to talk to Calvin Royal and Unity Phelan. I'm just sitting here reflecting, and it starts to make me kind of cry almost. I see these dancers on the stage in New York, but it's always very personal how we get to know each
moment.
other.
Yeah.
So I remember seeing Calvin doing a class with Mark Morris for the Center for Ballet and the Arts when I was first a fellow. It's already like 6 years ago. And I'd seen Calvin on the stage, but it's always for me up close. Sometimes I've gotten introduced to a dancer by being on an elevator with them. Mm-hmm. It's that personal. And our Unity, we got Unity from Albert. Yes. Damian and I saw Unity in AGON, funny enough, as the two girls. And Damian had seen it, and then he sent me back to see her. And I couldn't tell by the program, and anyway, he said he couldn't remember her name.
Yeah, so I had seen Unity in class, and then saw her in AGON, and we talked about it. And I said to myself, her name? And I remember I was standing in the first ring at State Theater, and Albert Evans, the late, great Albert Evans, principal dancer with New York City Ballet, and then ballet master, was standing next to me, and I said, "Who is that?" And he said, "That's Unity." So I remember I texted him, and I asked for her name, and he wrote it out, and I still have that text. So that's how we met, as you said. You never know how that opportunity is going to arise. But you know what? I think they're in the waiting room. So why don't we bring in Unity Phelan and Calvin Royal to join us.
Hi, guys.
Hey, guys.
Hi. Where are you? Unity, you're in your apartment on Upper West Side?
Yes, up in Harlem in New York City.
Yes. And Calvin, where are you?
I'm at home in Queens. I've been here since all of this craziness started, so yeah, I'm here at home.
Well, Damian and I are we're very lucky to have a home in Connecticut, and we're here. Be careful what you wish for. I always wish I could spend all my time in Connecticut, and now I am.
That's right. Watching the seasons change.
So we wanted to let's just dive in. So Unity is going to come to Vail the first time. What's the year, Damian?
2015?
About?
I think that's right.
School of. And Unity has a big jump.
Yeah.
But also Unity is a no-brainer for the entire leotard and black and white repertory. So, of course, we know she'll do that. And what do we want to do? We want to enhance her career. We want to complement it by challenging her in other areas. So her first role was your choice.
I wanted to see her do the jumping girl, the girl in red, Karen von Raldingen's role in Who Cares? So I remember, we talked about that, and then we went and worked on it in New York for a while, and then she came out to Vail, and that was what was planned, as I recall. That's where we were, and that was how Unity began. And Calvin, as I recall, first came to be a part of a Pam Tanowitz new work,
Yep.
And then quickly started taking on new roles, especially in the Balanchine Rep. And I think that's, we're going to go through some of these things and we're going to have some visuals to accompany it. But everything starts somewhere, and then the unexpected usually happens, and there's something more that gets added. And in a funny way, I think to me, the more was about curating the roles, the opportunity to mentor and to work on things. But then it was also the two of you, to create that opportunity for two dancers to start a life.
Because we haven't explained to our audience that Unity Phelan is a soloist in the New York City Ballet currently. And when we met her, she was a young corps girl at the New York City Ballet. And Calvin Royal, when we met him, was a corps boy at American Ballet Theater and is now a soloist at American Ballet Theater. Both of these dancers are well known to the dance audience. They're cover girls and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen from Dance Magazine on. Calvin, you were beautiful cover this month. I've saved both. We get it because we got the thing when we were old, and so they send it to us. So I've saved them for you because it has, Heather Watts, that's mine, and Damian's, and we're fans. So you'll autograph those for us. And Unity, you're everywhere. So let's look at Unity.
I'm going to share screen for a moment so we can look at some images that, to help us go through the conversation.
Wow, well, look at that. Okay. So very, very young. What do you think?
Oh, I think I was 18, maybe 18, 17.
And so gorgeous, so gorgeous.
So gorgeous. So right. It was a great choice, Damian, to start Unity off doing this. And in fact, I think Unity, am I wrong? Did you do it the next season at the company?
I did.
So
well, that's
her lankiness, her pinup girl, her quirky kind of, I don't know the word for it, but devil-may-care attitude, all just shows in that photo, as well as enormous jump. Like flying on those, like I remember it like yesterday. So, but lots of work, right, Unity? Lots of work. So we'll go back to that. By accident, the same season, we needed a second soloist performer in Barocco, and guess who came up and told me she had done it in winter intensive in Boston or something, and she whispered in my ear, and then she got to do a principal role in Concerto Barocco with the Colorado Ballet, and look at that.
Sailing.
Yeah.
And I would say that one of the other things that, relates both to this, obviously, and to Who Cares, and really, obviously, to all of the Balanchine repertory, is musicality and the emphasis on music and how we listen, understand, contextualize, make music really integral to everything that happens in our dancing, that it's not two things, that it is one thing. And I think, as Unity, I really recall a lot of discussions about music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd been rehearsing with Damian, and I remember being so nervous to work with Heather for the first time, like on the verge of shaking. I was a very, very nervous young performer, and I come out and start to do the variation as I had rehearsed, and Heather stops, like not even 2 steps into the variation, and she's like, "Okay, where'd you see that? Where'd you see that done?" And I was like, "Oh, it's on the video that I've been watching." She's like, "Okay, who are you watching?" And I was like, "I think I've watched Kira and I've watched Lourdes." And she was like, "Great. So if you hadn't ever watched Kira or Lourdes, how would you do it?" And that for me was like, my mind went blown. And from that point forward, it became less of a study into my technical abilities and what they could teach me how to execute better, and more of a study into my unityness, as Heather and Damian call it, and how I approach a step differently than someone else. And that, for me, that exact first moment, and I think about that now when I rehearse things, and I start to do the steps, I'm like, whoa, I've seen this somewhere. Let me go back and let me think about how I would do this.
We all work a lot together in New York as well, in to different amounts. But on regular repertoire, when I see Unity, and I can tell before she runs to a corner when she's got an idea, and we all and you know, I didn't invent this. Like, this is a good moment for you to bring in why we're talking, who we're talking about here. I'm like you, Unity. I'm in a rehearsal, but in front of me is not me, but Balanchine, right? And I'm doing square dance. And I'm suffering over a circle of emboîtés that Meryl Ashley did like Fred Astaire. I mean, it was so great, right? And she did 2 circles. And I'm like clumping along and doing my one. And he says, just do 1 circle, dear. And I start to say, and I say, well, Meryl, and he was like, do you mean Pat Wilde? And I said, no, Meryl. And he said, no, this was made for Pat Wilde. Meryl does her way, you do your way, Pat Wilde did her way. And in that moment, I still feel less than, because I want to do the 2, and I want to do that. But I'm slowly learning to trust that the individual voice that we're born with is the only reason we have to dance. You know, there isn't a technical reason to dance. I mean, there is if you're in a dance competition. But the reason people come to the ballet is to be moved, is to have an experience. And so not having Unity there, or not having Calvin, if your thoughts are all on how is my, you know, Balanchine used to say to me, he'd see me practicing a double pirouette on stage before a performance, and he'd say, what are you doing? And I said, I'm practicing, the double in, and he'd say, but every double pirouette is the same as every other double pirouette. So there's so much, he's like, why aren't you practicing the musicality? What really matters, right? So we try to give you that space. Time out. Come to Vail. Spend 2 weeks on the top of a mountain at 8,000 feet where you can't breathe, and challenge you and compliment you. You know, we look at your repertoire, we look at what you're aiming for, and we try to balance it. We try to second guess what the big companies will be able to do with you that year. We try to give you opportunities you're never going to get. We try to pair you. I mean, the 2 of you, your length, right? And this was Damian. Damian was like, these 2, where are they? Do we have a picture of them? These 2 belong together.
On the stage in Vail.
Doing a really hard dance. And I've had smart people say to me, why does Damian make Calvin and Unity do stars? The best thing that ever happened to them. Look at them. Look at the young, fresh, and modern Americana that this photo inhabits. Look at that. If that's not the dream of ballet in 2020, I don't know what is.
And then there's that.
Oh, wow.
Welcome, Calvin.
I mean, I must jump in and say that having had the opportunity to come to Vail for the last 5-6 years and just continue to grow each year with new repertoire that I honestly wouldn't have had the opportunity to dance at ABT has been a huge gift. It's been an incredible gift for me. Getting to dance with you, Unity. I mean, it's like we always have such a great time on stage together. And I think having this opportunity to dance these Balanchine roles at 8,000 feet where I'm dying, oxygen mask whenever I go off stage. It's allowed me to grow so much, and I just look forward to all the more experiences that we'll have together.
I'd like to, thinking about the progression, about how these things add up. So we started, as we just went over Unity's entry level there, and then Calvin with Stars, which we just took a quick look at, and then onward into AGON, and then last year to Apollo. which is, just a building blocks of the masterpieces of Mr. Balanchine, but, really together, kind of developing, and then doing these parts in different circumstances, meeting heroes along the way. I think back to the moments of you teaching them AGON, and then that kind of pivotal moment when they shared it with Mr. Mitchell.
Well, yes, the accident of that was one of the great blessings, right? So the originals in AGON in 1957. I mean, the dream in that photo too, the modernism, the black and whiteness of it, in terms of costume, in terms of skin tone, in terms of the year. And when we look at the years we are in, when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, and we think about Balanchine in the first round of civil rights in 1957, placing Arthur Mitchell with Diana Adams in all their beauty at the heart of the ballet, in this very intimate and complex and sensuous, athletic. It's got gender, it's got a strong woman at its heart. This is not a woman being carted around. And just look at that picture. It's magnificent. And, Balanchine hired Mel Tomlinson from the Dance Theater of Harlem to dance AGON at the New York City Ballet. The year was 1981. And to go through this story quickly, I had been dancing AGON. I had done it with Peter Martens and Adam Luters, both Danish dancers. And one day he said to Peter, you're wonderful in AGON, but you're white. And I've hired Mel, and I want him to dance it with Heather. Will you make sure that their versions are good? And later that month, Mel and I went on the stage and danced the pas de deux. It was in November of 81. And Balanchine worked with us. It was an extraordinary experience. But he kind of also did what I hoped to be able to do with Unity and Calvin, which is really let their youth and todayness live at the heart of it. I wanted them to know the sort of representational justice of Calvin being African American and Unity not, to put it in the same lens that it was. I wanted that. And I wanted it for them to show us today. Mm-hmm. To not be like me and Mel. To not be like Arthur and Diana. To not be like Maria Kurowski and Amar Ramazar at New York City Ballet. To be them. And that's digging deep, because the imagery of this ballet is pretty profound. It's around us. It surrounds us. There's pictures of Maria Kurowski. Like, I think I'm in a pawn shake. Maria's like past a split, right? And that's tempting stuff, man. That's what you want to do. That works for Maria. It is Maria. The great Wendy Whelan and Albert Evans, they met, Jock Soto met with Wendy, and they told their story. But I wanted Calvin, who's probably going to stay at Ballet Theater and be a happy camper. And he was supposed to do Romeo and Juliet this year. So we look forward to that next year. But I wanted him to know this like he knows the inside of his own arm. And I wanted Unity to know that. What you see in that picture right there. I wanted her to know that person. I wanted her to find that person, to drive that story for herself. And, when you're in a ballet company, especially repertory companies, sometimes you learn a ballet in 3 weeks, sometimes you learn it in 2 days, sometimes you learn it. I think we have the opportunity. Let's use this. And let's not dance like me. Let's not dance like Damian. Let's dance like ourselves. Let's get on the top of a mountain in the middle of Colorado and dance like ourselves and dance like nobody's watching, right? And look at your glory, Unity. I love this picture. Calvin, you're gorgeous, but look at her face. And yes, the penché is quite something, but there's knowledge in that face. And Calvin, look at you finding your way there. I think that's 2017. I think it's the first time you've ever done it. And I think you are trying to stand on two legs while corralling that crazy, wild critter we call Unity. It's fantastic. I think some people would look at that and say, that's not the step. And I say, well, that was that step that night. And so Unity, we're back to your point about, yes, Lourdes was beautiful and who cares? And Kira, Kira's also bouncy ponytail and all of that. Wonderful. But this is your Unity-ness. It's very different than, say, how I would do this, isn't it, Damian?
Well, we have a side-by-side, I think. Take a look. There we go.
So it's very similar, and it's very different. And it's accommodating. Look, Mel is hanging on to me with two hands, I see there. Calvin, next time, grab her by the leg, I learned everything I know about dance from George Balanchine, from his attitude, and Stanley Williams and Jerome Robbins, but Balanchine led us all. He led us with the thinking of, it's not until tonight. I used to say to him, but can't I do it like this? It's in my body. And he'd be like, I'd say, and he'd say, well, when is it, dear? And I'd say, but see, it's tonight. I won't be able to change. And he's like, it's not until tonight. So risk. So we haven't talked about risk. So for me, yes, highest level dancers in the world. And we have said the great grace Damian has brought you into our lives. He's brought you fully into our lives where we get to go here and do this with this opportunity. And the Vail Dance Festival lets us just expand our universe, right? But what really happens is you guys work like dogs.
How is that work for you? I mean, when you think about these roles, and we're going to go to Apollo in a minute. Talk to us a little bit about, the passing on. I remember I was first generation post Balanchine. And that the legacy of that, trying to absorb all of that information with the realizing the importance of it is interesting and thorny and sometimes difficult. But I do think that in our community in Vail, it's a very particular kind of work that's very focused and intense. Even that we go back to New York and we'll continue, and the work continues. Tell us a little bit about how that goes, and let's hear.
I think that's what makes being part of the Vail Dance Festival so unique, is that it's not just a one-off performance and then you get your check and then you go home. It's, for me, over the years, been this whole journey of growth in these roles that I never would have had the opportunity to dance. And when I see these images of AGON and how many times Unity and I have performed it, both at Vail but also back here in New York, it amazes me to be able to know that we've grown in these roles together, but also knowing the historical context of a pas de deux like AGON, with Arthur Mitchell and Diana Adams, and when it was created and what it meant then and what it means now to perform those roles. It adds that next layer of artistry and just what we want to bring part of ourselves and our experiences to the stage every time we step out there together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's like just a kind of a safe space. I like to think of Vail and like your guys' coaching. There's never like a no, that's wrong, don't do that. It's always like, okay, I see what you're going for there, but let's think about a different path. And I think that especially with AGON and Apollo, when Calvin and I at New York City Ballet, we always kind of jump into our rep, and because AGON, Apollo, all of these amazing Balanchine classics have been around, anybody who comes into a studio to learn it already knows the steps. But I think for me, it was so wonderful having Calvin because he did not know the steps. So we actually had to take time to learn it and to teach it. And in doing that slowly, I feel like I discovered more of the intention behind it and the pureness of it, and being able to work on it for a period of time that's not 1 week before the show is like, it's heavenly to be able to take that in. And especially and that's, I think, when we started working on AGON, Calvin and I got really close because it's a very close pas de deux, but we were spending all this time together figuring out how we wanted to do it, and that was so magical. And that's what Vail is to me. It's creative license and time to figure out how you want to do something, which is very valuable.
I had the same issue, being at New York City Ballet, so it's my time to do AGON. I'm very excited and sort of felt that, like you, I lent myself to the leotard ballets, and as they started to come to me, I had a lot of preconceived ideas. And because I had watched, I had sat at the feet of Suzanne Farrell, of Kay Mazo, of Allegra Kent. Now, these are great, great predecessors. And my belt actually said Adams, Kent, Mazo, Farrell, Watts. And I was like, this is the scariest belt in the world. Like, what is not like the others? Right? That game, like, doesn't belong here? And then Waylon got at it, and then, So, in that guise, we're sensitive to what we went through. And we try to make what you call a safe space where none of that applies. Like, it's okay, like, we know you've watched a movie or you've seen or you've loved Wendy and AGON. We know that. We know you're combating it. And so we also know that the musicality is not second nature to Calvin.
Not at all. I mean, that was one of the biggest challenge in AGON in particular, learning the musicality, learning the timing, how to have unity where she needed to be, and I'm over here, and
that was a lot of work on the music with Cameron Grant, wonderful pianist, kind of helping us along the way every step till it became really second nature to you, and you could actually be in it. I mean, we've talked a lot about those conversations that are on film between Mr. Balanchine and Igor Stravinsky, and they're talking about time, whether it's in time or on time, and getting past that kind of quality that you just are trying to be on a beat to actually understanding the music. And I remember, AGON, you've done it now several years, so it's becoming more and more like that.
Let's talk briefly about a special day in our lives a very special day for me. Damian called me or texted me at home and said, Mr. Mitchell is looking for you.
Yes.
And, your heart skips a beat. It's like, and I'm like an old lady. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like 2 years ago, right? 3 years ago. Arthur had a performance in New York. He was given his archives to Columbia. And he had a couple from New York City Ballet to dance AGON. And suddenly he needed you guys because there was an injury among the couple he had engaged. So it was a private performance up at Columbia University. But that night we were doing what I call a yak. We were at the Center for Ballet and the Arts.
Oh, wait. Yes, I think
we were talking about AGON. So obviously our audience out there, and Damian knows this, there's nothing I'd rather talk about than AGON. So I was doing what I love best, and Mr. Mitchell was like, can I borrow those dancers? And I said, well, of course you have to ask them, but I think that they will really be delighted to dance it for you. So first you guys did our concert for Jennifer Homans down at NYU. Then you hopped in an Uber and went all the way up to the Miller Theater at Columbia, like 100 blocks or more, and danced it for Arthur. And unbelievable, it was the first time that either of you had met Arthur, right?
Yeah, it was.
Oh my God, look at that picture.
It was one of those nights that I'll never forget. I just remember us coming out and preparing right on as we're about to take the first diagonal in AGON. And when the lights come up, we see Arthur sitting in this big blue armchair on stage, downstage right. And it was just like he was there with us in this performance, and I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that.
Now, and I'm going to tell our audience what he said. Arthur was exacting. Arthur was a major influence in the dance world for a lot of reasons. He was a pioneer, but he was also very exacting. And when they finished performing, he stood up and he turned to the audience. I think he even broke into your applause. maybe a little jealous, Arthur, and said, well, AGON is in very good hands. Mm-hmm. And I was so happy for the two of you, because what greater accolade could be given to you and all the work you had put into it than Arthur tipping his hat. And not something he did often, so we were lucky. And then Calvin and Unity, you went on to perform it at Mr. Mitchell's memorial, didn't you?
I actually recently, we had shared all this footage that we had with each other of all of these, of AGON specifically, and Calvin had a video of it, and I rewatched it just to kind of remind myself of the place that we were at in that time period, and that performance for me was so magical. It was like just one of those, everything, I didn't even think about anything as it was happening. There was no stressful moment of, is my knee straight, am I pointing my toe? And it was a very, very special performance in that church.
It really, I was there. I'm like your guys' little fan, going to the Miller Theater and going, of course I was at Arthur's memorial, and so knowing how right it was. Yes. And of course then AGON led us to
Apollo.
And Calvin.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful drawing by Andrea Shelby, who's been an artist in residence at the festival for many years, capturing, in her own style, what goes on in the rehearsal rooms and on the stage. And it's a beautiful representation of what you guys did. And that was just last summer, which then led to your debut with ABT in the fall as Apollo.
Yeah, it was... I mean, us talking about how Vail lends itself to our own individual careers beyond the festival, getting to learn Apollo with you, Damian, for Vail, and then having the chance to do it with ABT in its full capacity at State Theater it was an honor, and one of those surreal moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm becoming Apollo. I am Apollo at State Theater, and I'm not with New York City Ballet, but this is amazing.
It's amazing.
But I'm in State Theater, and I'm Apollo. Wait, what's going on here? It was an incredible process. I have to say, I loved working on it with you, Calvin. I danced it myself quite a lot, but never at City Ballet, actually. It was a role that I discovered over many years, and getting to pass that on was really special. I remember these rehearsals that these images show us how we kind of worked through it, and then when we added Unity to the rehearsal.
Oh my goddess!
And there was that. Oh my goddess! And then ending up in Vail on the stage with the beautiful musicians and that particular environment, which is a whole nother element, obviously, to do it in that environment.
Look at the architecture of your arms, and and then it's nice, Damian, this photo's showing Johnny and Colin, because Brooklyn Rider gives us so much during the festival, don't they? They give us, they make sounds for us. Yes. Out of scratch, practically, where we need 64, we have 14 or 7 and
or
4 or a quartet, and look at the beauty of your line there, Calvin.
It's really stunning,
really gorgeous.
Yeah, well, we worked on it. There it is, and it keeps going. And then onto the stage, the two of you brought such.
Isn't that beautiful?
Representative of the spirit in so many ways it's not just static. It truly is movement. And I think we see that in this photo.
Oh man, I love that photo. I gotta say, Balanchine always, he wanted that, but you guys have such a light touch. It's exquisite.
Well, and then, Calvin, I mean, I think if we had an image that might, portend leaping into the future, it's you and Apollo. And, and in the end, we realized that most of this is about singular moments. We go on a stage, we do it, but then there's this continuity. And, I wanted to share that. Because it's about, you're going to go on and you'll do this and then there'll be the next. And in the same way that, I know Mr. Balanchine told you, teach your children, you will do the same.
Yeah. So honoring Balanchine and Vail has been a gift to my life. It was an unintended consequence of Damian running a dance festival, and a wonderful consequence. But it also gave me, has given me a gaggle of kids who grow up and give me what for on that stage, and give us a lot of joy. Calvin, you are the 2020 Artist in Residence.
And 2021.
And 2021. And on and on. And Damian spoke to me about why, and he talked about a growing voice, a leadership voice in dance.
Yes.
And
it's so much more than just, to me, when we think about your dancing, whether it's you, Unity, or you, Calvin, of course we want to work with you on your abilities and your ability to connect with audiences. But it's also, that, what did you say, the unityness or the Calvinness that has to do with how you can actually grow and your voice and your leadership. And Calvin, as artist in residence, you are taking on all kinds of aspects of leadership that will portend for the future. And that's all, I think Heather and I look at this as, when we say passing Balanchine on, it's about that. It's about what's next and how you will then pass on. And this is the opportunity, of lifetimes, ours, yours. So I've loved these chances. And for the audience out there, we're sharing both the Apollo Adagio and the AGON pas de deux as part of this digital festival. They can go and see it online for a limited amount of time at Vail Dance, YouTube, and Facebook. But then come to Vail next year and see it live and see what's next.
You guys have helped me advance my own belief in the value system of mentorship.
Yes.
And careful curation and musicality. The additional elements to dance that we value, you guys further those aesthetics, and you help me find new ways to push you.
It's a gift. It's a gift.
We love you.
We love you guys.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much for having this conversation with us today. Can't wait to keep passing it on.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Good to be back with you for another conversation in this program of Passing Balanchine On at the Vail Dance Festival. I'm Damian Woetzel, director of the festival. And for this digital edition in the summer of 2020, we're presenting archived retrospective programs on video and also having conversations with several of the artists who've participated in the festival over many years. For this segment, I'm going to get to talk to Carla Korbes, who I've known for many years from her time, all the way back when she was at the School of American Ballet, and then New York City Ballet, and then Pacific Northwest Ballet, and then LA Dance Project. And now she comes to us from Bloomington, where she's a professor. But we're going to focus in throughout all of those experiences, and there's so many ways that we overlapped, including dancing together. But one particular experience is where we're going to focus today, which is the revival of ÉLÉGIE, George Balanchine choreography, Igor Stravinsky music, which we did in 2012. It came to me as something out of a history book. I saw lists of repertory my whole career, and I would pore over them, and as I became a director myself of this dance festival and other enterprises, I was always looking for something unusual, and here was something unusual from 1982. And I arrived in New York in 1984. I never saw it. It was sort of legendary, created for Suzanne Farrell. It was the last time Balanchine choreographed this piece of music. He'd done it several other times in his lifetime, and it was mysterious. I spoke to Barbara Horgan, Mr. Balanchine's right hand and the founder of his trust, about it, and she said, I might be able to help you find a forgotten recording. And so it became kind of a great grail, like how can we do this? All along I had in mind one person, and that was Carla Korbes. So Carla, welcome. Great to see you.
Really good to see you, Damian.
Oh my goodness. So we have a long history, you and I, a lot of different performances, but I think this particular collaboration, because it really was a collaboration, was especially meaningful to me. Had you known anything about ÉLÉGIE when I gave you a call about that?
No, just like you, I had never heard of this piece of work, and I was really interested when you brought it up. And the first thing that I thought is, like, how do we revive something so special? And how do we make that come to life again?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously that was the challenge, but then also to understand it, as a solo, it's unusual. It's pretty short, just over 3 minutes, about 4 minutes long, to have an impact in the way that was required and do justice to it. And there's so many aspects to it that are very emotional. But one of my favorite Balanchine quotes is, "You don't want to butter the bacon." You don't want to overdo all that emotion, so how do you find your way through that? And in ÉLÉGIE, over many months, I think we started in New York before, and then we went to Vail and worked on it there. I added this extraordinary violist, Nicholas Cords, to the mix, and gradually, brought it to life. I do have a few images I think I might share, which will be interesting to see. So I'm starting with this just because Andrea Shelby, the great visual artist, captured this of you in rehearsal. In that particular moment, which recurs, is so symbolic of ÉLÉGIE itself. And I thought, before we go any further, let's talk about that. What is it? Remember we used to say we're wiping? Show me. This is just how we did it. Show me.
But it's such an intimate moment, and I kept thinking, how do you embody Suzanne Farrell, right? This was made for her. And how, what did that mean to her? It was a very intimidating role to step into. But I'm so thankful that you brought it to life. But we did spend a long time trying to figure out and then there's this little flick in the end.
That's right, the hand. And also just the taking of the hands. Yeah.
And how, from looking at Suzanne's videos, how, you know, the way she would place the hands from the beginning was much more simple. And the last time you do it, there's a little bit more of like that angst. There was so much in those videos that we watched together.
And you've performed this now for, it's getting to be, first was 2012, so almost a decade that you've known this work, and you've danced it in Vail. You're the only other person to ever have danced it except for Suzanne. Did it in Vail, you did it in New York at our City Center Vail season, in Washington at the Kennedy Center.
Yeah.
And did you find yourself now, you know, your own Carla in the ÉLÉGIE at this point?
I think at some point you just have to embrace that you're given this opportunity, and you dive into the role and let the choreography feed you what it wants to portray. So I, you know, through all the work we did and all the times I've performed, I am very creative when I dance. So every movement that Balanchine choreographed, I feel something at every moment that, you know, the music starts and you're just sitting there, you're doing nothing. And the first thing that happens is you pick up the hand, and I'm already in this world. So it's an amazing piece to perform.
I have so many images of you doing it. I think I'm going to share a few right now to guide us in the conversation a little bit. So this is back in 2012 when we got together on the stage in Vail with Nick Korbes, the violist from Brooklyn Rider. And so much of this was exploring music, I think, but also, again, going back to those emotional depths of what we can actually express. And, you know, you worked through so many iterations of this with me. And, you know, I'm wondering, you know, at this point you danced so much of the Balanchine repertory, you know, so you brought all that with you to this. Are there any things that you remember thinking, you know, how you were going to approach it fresh as you went along, as opposed to something, or was it a continuation of all those roles in a way?
I think it's a continuation of all the roles, and the way Balanchine is so musical and so expressive, but not over the top. The way that he allows you to move in different ways with your hands. I think the style of Balanchine is all about the details of things. And in this very simple choreography, you see all the possibilities of beauty.
Yes. Yeah, it really is a question of kind of not overpowering it, I think, in this solo very much. It has a delicacy to it, but it's a presence, and there's a very distinctive music in the middle throughout. But there's those when you have to start your walks on point, moving on diagonal. I remember you struggling in the beginning to find almost your attitude to it. You know, what is the attitude when it accelerates in that moment?
Yeah.
A special piece.
And then the resolution when you come back. Dee da 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 da.
Oh, in the end.
What was the end like for you? It's a very distinctive ending, where you turn up stage and you have to cambre back.
Surrender. It's the moment of, because you turn around, then you just do the cambre back, and it's the end. It's a little bit like the end of Serenade. You know, you do the beginning of Serenade and then you end with a cambre back. It feels a little bit like that.
It's a sister, isn't it? Of that role, which you danced as well, of course. There's some, I mean, elements obviously in the attire of Sonnambula, which you also danced in Vail. You seem to wear beautiful kind of elegiac outfits on the stage outside in Vail at night. Cold, and Chaconne as well, finding yourself exposed in that way. It's a purity of lyricism is what I was thinking. I remember when I first saw it and I thought this would be right for you. I was thinking about that lyrical quality. But that makes it sound a little bit like it's just all about, it doesn't have hard edges. But this piece actually does. What are the hard edges in there for you? How do you know it's? How do you approach those?
Even after you do there's a whole sequence on the floor, and you present yourself, and then you just stand up. That is a hard edge in a way, because you're just facing the audience like this is you. And then there's a little bit of drama in the middle. But yes, it's not all lyrical, and there is the seriousness to it and the confrontation of...
Confrontation.
Yes.
That's what I was...
Yeah.
Well, audiences, for a limited time, will get to see this on Vail Dance YouTube and Facebook, and come to see it live the next time we have the opportunity to do so. But your history at Vail, beginning in 2007, right up to the present, has grown as a dancer and also helping in rehearsals, guide the young dancers. When you think of Vail, what's the legacy there? And now yourself as a teacher and someone who passes on, how do you approach what you're doing right now, and how does it relate to the work we've been doing in Vail all these years?
It's such an amazing place to be in my life, where I've had this history with you of being a colleague and dancing on the stage, and then getting to work in a way for you when you're artistic director of Vail Dance, and we put together these amazing shows there. And then now being able to also help Isabella and Tiler Peck and pull out all the details that we worked on, that I've worked with Heather Watts, and now I get to be also next to Heather going, oh, what else can we do? What else can that beautiful dancer in front of us do for this special performance?
Well, that is
It summarizes Vail. It's this exploration of great minds coming together. And
well, we always think about a next step, like what is next for a dancer or for a choreographer or composer or musician or indeed, in your case, all of, the dancing, but then the passing on now, which is all about, sharing what you've learned, but not didactically, not saying this is how it has to be. This is the opportunity to explore and to be to figure it out in some ways for yourself as an artist. And I've watched you do that in so many ways over the years as a dancer, and now as well. I can picture you.
I think you've allowed that to happen because you always pair people to dance together with people that maybe they haven't worked with. So that alone allows for people to explore, how do I do this role that I've done for 20 years with this new partner?
Right. Well, that's it's personal, because I remember that as a dancer myself. And I remember trying to find the new way to grapple with something, to find the texture. And Vail itself, I remember thinking as a dancer before I was director, gave that opportunity because of the environment, that it had a different quality to it, to dance, Stars and Stripes, here, there, Moscow, Mexico City, New York, and then in Vail outside, it was just different. And I think that's such a particular quality. So even in this moment that we get to share these films retrospectively, we look ahead and we think, it'll be so good to be back there and see what we can do next. live and welcome audiences to be a part of that, to connect with us on the work, whether it's on the stage or in the town or over in rehearsal, or celebrate the beat with the little kids.
Right.
That's really the ethic, I guess, is what's grown. And I want to thank you so much for being such a big part of it, Carla. Such a big part of it.
I can't believe we're not there this year, but we're here.
But we are here. We're here together, and we're sharing how we pass things on. And this been great to revisit ÉLÉGIE with you. And I just can't wait to see you.
Me too.
Bye, my friend.
Bye.
So I think one of the most important things that we, and I say get to do purposefully, is spend time with young artists and curate, their path, curate their dances, their partners, their progression, and thinking back to, my own time. I remember how important that was and how much time was spent thinking about all this. But having the opportunity to do it with a dancer for many years over the course of their career from a young age is just a huge kind of a gift and a privilege.
My time at City Ballet, different than yours. I had both Balanchine and Jerome Robbins, as my kind of North Stars. And we shared Jerry Robbins and Stanley Williams. So 3 big leadership voices in my ear. And all day, every day.
Right.
And all we danced then, funny words like all we danced Balanchine and Robbins. And then, Peter Martins made ballets on me, and that grew. But really the paths
focused
at New York City Ballet were Balanchine and Robbins. And I found that your work in Vail has afforded me the opportunity to really work with a variety of dancers, obviously, that we've chosen separately and together. Let's just start with some names to help us here. Joe Gordon.
Sure.
Right. So when you saw Joe and you knew you wanted to bring him to Vail, you were so excited, and
it just clicked. I saw him on the stage in a ballet by Ben Millepied, and I said, "Wow, this guy." It was the musicality, it was the intent, it was he had something to say, and I was interested. And I remember we talked about it quickly, and I ran into him on the stairs of State Theater, stage entrance, and said, "Hey, next summer, can you hold some time for Vail?" And then it was like, okay, and what should he do? And how does it go?
And
what's
what
next?
should he do?
Yeah.
We worked together and separately on filling in, right? Like complimenting, doing the opposite of what they're good at, so they
Sure.
get stronger in weak areas. And sometimes I always thought with, say, Joe, you were, and with young Roman Mejia now, you're pouring in your male Balanchine chops. With Herman Cornejo, I see you working your kind of poetic Robbins, imaginative, but the through line for you is music.
As always, yeah, and it
music.
depends on the various stages that anybody's in. I look at someone like Herman, and I think very much actually in some ways of my own career, and at certain moments when I wanted something more. I needed to add to the meal. I needed something else.
Right.
So I think about that. And when we, spend time with these dancers, you get to know their individual qualities, and also, to try and fill in the painting in different ways so that the core, the Balanchine, it has fuel. So it's not just what happens in the room in a rehearsal with Mr. Balanchine's ballets.
Right. So you just said it, though. It's never really been said. The core of everything we do comes out from Balanchine outwards and music outwards, and Jerry outwards. And then, it's certainly, you think about the young Lauren Lovett doing Giselle in Vail and thinking, I mean, what a dream, right? To put that beautiful kind of special quality, or Isabella and James dancing Serenade last summer. So they're both the Cindy's, as you guys know them, are in American Ballet Theater. And Serenade by Balanchine, the great Tchaikovsky ballet he made on students, is not
in their rep.
So the dream for us is offering building of chops, or like this summer, so many dreams. It didn't happen. India Bradley and Chris Grant were doing a pas de deux for us for the first time. A lot of thinking goes into it. When you brought Alonzo to Vail to choreograph on New York City Ballet and Lines, 4 from each, you and I very much wanted those dancers to experience the Alonzo-ness, the finding of the true inner voice.
Yeah, the human factors that Alonzo King brings into a room are going to affect everything.
Yeah.
From that moment on,
and it worked.
Whether with Unity or Miriam or Chris Grant, Roman, working with Alonzo's dancers, working with Alonzo, working with Jason Moran, sitting at the piano. I mean, that will change you. And it comes back into the core, for sure. When you go back to New York City Ballet and you're going out there in episodes, you have something else.
You have something more
ingredients.
Yeah.
So lots of dreams deferred this summer, as you said.
A lot. We had a lot of new young dancers coming. We had Mira and KJ and Isabel and Naomi and Savannah Durham. We had all these young dancers coming.
And that process will pick it back up in person next year, obviously, but also during the year in New York, we have lots of opportunities to get to pass on. But I think nobody probably...
Well, you see, again, a year that's hard on everyone. So let's talk about our Peckster.
Yeah, so we're going to talk now about and with Tiler. Tiler Peck, who's been such a huge part of our lives as a young dancer, a mentee, a friend, someone who's been an integral part of the Vail Festival since 2008 when she first came. And has been a part of all these things we're talking about, working on a revival like Divertimento Brilliant, rediscovering something and redefining it for this moment in the 21st century, to just, roaring through repertory that's not part of her daily life, whether it's Jose Limon or Twyla Tharp, Martha Graham, Paul Taylor, working with Mr. Taylor, all the choreographers, getting her tap shoes on with Dorrance,
or excerpting something that I want her to do a deep dive on. That happens too. Sometimes saying, okay, let's have Tyler do this summer, and with the idea that she'll have more time, more input. Carla will be there, Korbes, also, and Margaret Tracy helps us, and we have a lot of different voices feeding. But I guess it's time. Let's bring on our
Tyler, are you with us? Have you arrived on the stage, as it were?
Hi guys. I was getting a little emotional. I was like, normally I come on and I'm really excited, but it's true. And I was just thinking about the years that I've spent getting to work with you. It's just been one of the greatest joys overall for me.
Well, and right back at you. I mean, watching you, remember that line from the Susan Stroman, has been our greatest joy.
Well, right back at you.
So we want to talk about, all of this, path that we've done, specific to Vail, but also in the world. And so the story is important. How we look at it is based on how we meet. And I remember it happens in a strange way, actually. 2004, I was not well. I had an appendix issue, and I was home in bed, waiting to figure out what was wrong with me. And that was a real turning point in my career and my life, because it was the first time I'd actually ever missed very much time at all. But Heather went to the workshop, and she came home and she said, "There's a girl." And she was talking about you and Union Jack back then. And then I remember seeing you.
Well, which is funny because people don't know. So she was doing the K Mezzo role in Union Jack, which I had also danced. But it's not on point. It's da-da-da-da-da. And all I saw was what I thought I saw was dimples and charisma. But of course, what I was also seeing was unbelievably evolved musicality in a 15-year-old. And I didn't understand her name, Tyler with an I. And I was like, who is this critic?
Tyler. So, flash forward, I get back, and I remember going to LA that fall. I was back on the boards, and there you were in class. And I asked Heather, and I said, I think I saw that young woman you mentioned. And then that lodged. And as time went on, not that long, maybe another 6 months to a year, I started thinking about my own path and my next steps. And at the same time, some partners were sidelined. And I remember thinking, carousel. I think I'm going to talk to Chris Wheeldon about having Tyler do it.
I remember.
And that was a good conversation. And it led to so much. So I think I'm actually going to share screen for a moment. And we're going to take a quick look at some of the things that were that initial part of the story.
Wow.
So there you have the beginning. And, so many things, so many memories about that, talking, a lot of talking, right? In rehearsal, a lot of discovering why we were doing what we were doing. That part was made on me. I taught it to you myself, I remember, in the studio. And you would come down the hall, so professional, just ready to go, leg warmers off, and then we'd begin. And that led to, the next Fancy Free, which is actually, what I retired with. And
wow, look at that foot.
I mean, that foot, we talk about that all the time. And then shortly after that, I decided after my last performance at City Ballet that I'd have my last performance in Vail. So I asked you to come out, and really that was the beginning of kind of taking the Peckster and saying, okay, here's the next step. And that was Twyla's Sinatra Suite, which we did together.
So sweet.
And, learned it together. It was new for both of us. It was my last debut, I guess you could say. And, when we saw things in you on that really,
Look at you.
started to tell us things about what was possible beyond the technique and beyond the bravery. There was also this under there with
And
your
you're
blonde
a teenager.
hair.
You're a teenager here.
You are a teenager, and look at her there. That's after that performance in Vail. So I'm going to stop sharing right there and just say, how about that? So that's how it began. That's where the story starts. And Tyler, one of the things that always struck me was that bravery. You just were not afraid of any of it, were you?
I think I was mostly scared the first time I walked in with you, just because here I was, I don't remember, I think I was like 17 years old, and I thought, I'm called to a rehearsal with Damian Woetzel. Like, something seems a little off. And so I just didn't know what to expect. And from the very beginning, you were so nurturing of me. I remember, like, after that time, I just looked forward to being in the room with you every single time, because it was about the work, but it was also, you just taught me so much every single day. And it was true. We talked so much. I remember even about like life events and things that would help me become, you know, a more mature artist, but also just person. And those rehearsals were just what I looked forward to during the day. So when you retired, it was like, it felt like the worst day, because I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to continue on when I feel like I just kind of found my best partner at the beginning of my career?
Well,
You know what?
so you know what happened. So there was a moment in those rehearsals where I said, I'm going to ask Heather to come tomorrow. And then Heather came, and, you know, we had started talking about music, but that's where it got real deep. And we started really exploring what was possible musically, in whether it was Carousel or American in Paris or Fancy Free, and then on and on and on.
Well, yes, and yet we haven't even started our Balanchine work yet. We should screen share that picture of your retirement where she is poking her head out.
Oh, I have to find that. Yes. I'm going to put that up right now. And this is me in front of the fence of the prodigal son's house. And Tyler's in the wing. And she's looking every bit like what she just said. Like, what is supposed to happen now?
Next. Okay, great. So yes, all of that work. Jerome Robbins' Fancy Free, Chris Wheeldon's Ballets, American in Paris, Carousel, and you're sailing through the rep. And then one night we were on vacation, and you texted Damian and said, I'm doing The Man I Love in Who Cares? Where are you guys? And, you know.
Yeah, we said we'll be back in New York tomorrow. And we'll see you on the next morning. Let's meet.
And so there's so many voices. There's never one voice that gets you to a role, you know. When I was a dancer, and this is something Tyler and I talk about a lot, I would see a lot of people over the years do a role. And so I already had a lot of ideas, and they would be filtering through. I'd be bringing them in to the room. So I'd see the originals, you know, Midsummer Night's Dream. I saw Violette with her kind of crazy, so she's one of the originals. The other original in Divertissement. So the exquisiteness of Violette's timing and turnout and precision, and Melissa Hayden's long arms, right? And then over the years, Kay Mazo's tippy, and then the one that, then Allegra, who,
Yeah.
you know, so I had all of these things, and then I had Balanchine saying to me, what are you doing, dear? No, do like you. So we sort of shared that process with Balanchine through my memories and through my, like, total insistent that you stay Tyler.
Your pexterness. Yes.
You know, that you stay Tyler, that you stay allegiant to your pexterness, and you learn all this and then you throw it out. So with The Man I Love, I remember Patty boring on like this, and a lot of people had come on all, you know, sort of simpering, and I thought how strong Patty was, and I thought that was important. You knew that. How would you know?
You said it was like the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, that's right, the Statue
Right?
of Liberty. And big New York, and that he was sort of a dream in her mind. And so I wanted you to have those thoughts swirling with all the ones that others were giving you. And you know, so in terms of Balanchine, I feel like our life, Tyler, and your life with Damian and mine in different ways has been an immersion in your incredible facility and technique and ability, and your musicality.
Yeah.
Which is
That was the second half of that rehearsal when she started to do Fascinating Rhythm, and we just said, okay. So, because you were always a musician, but that's where you started really to play the drums, right?
and tap dance,
And tap dance.
you know?
I remember it was like 2 days before the premiere and they switched my part, and I remember being like, guys, I don't feel like I have this rolled down. Can we get in a studio? And I'll never forget that rehearsal like you guys are talking about. And then I went on stage and it just seemed like I had done it forever. And that's one thing that, like you said, Heather, you guys always know just the way how to push every dancer, but especially me. I feel like when I'm at Vail, and like you said, you know how to bring in those ballets that are our weaknesses and help us become better dancers, and then they help lead into the other ballets in our repertoire, like getting to do Chaconne. When would I get to do Chaconne at the New York City Ballet? Or bringing an entire corps and letting me do rubies, which I still have never done at the New York City Ballet. And I just feel like people have been putting so many videos up because they're so sad about Vail Festival this year. And I really just looked at those videos and I thought, wow, I really do my best dancing in Vail. And it's because I think I feel so comfortable with you both that I'm not afraid to take risks and just go out there and try everything. Like, you guys make that possible, which I don't think happens every single place.
Well, that's so
you
sweet.
certainly take those risks, my friend.
But that's the dream of the lab that Damian's created there. Look at that photo of Tyler from Rubies. Okay, I'm not sure. Not sure that's the step.
I just want to say, I just have to say, come on. I mean, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I mean,
wonderful.
the life there, and that was a double debut with you and Erman. Which was so wonderful to see both of you grab these roles. I mean, both of you just born to it in every possible way. Also, headpieces, of course, are important. And then, the legacy, that there's Heather,
that we're wearing the same crown, I think, Tyler.
Yes.
But the work, I mean, remember this? I mean, this was, how it happens.
No, that's me going, get out of my way, Tyler. I'm going to dance once in my life with Herman Cornejo.
That's right. And this is me going, get out of the way, Herman. I'm going to go back and dance with my partner now. So, that's honestly kind of how we roll, right? How we do, right?
One of the things that people who didn't have the grace to get to be alive during Balanchine's time, which means that they're young now, so there's a bonus to that, right? So you have to always try to look on the bright side. I mean, when I got to New York City Ballet, I kind of had wished I was there during City Center when he made AGON, and then other people are like, oh my God, to be there at the Stravinsky Festival. So there's more and more to learn and want.
Always,
but. One of the things that I feel that's been important for me, my little perch, what I knew was that certain roles could be reimagined by you.
Yeah.
And I think that's been such an important part of you feeling your Balanchine roots, your Jerry roots too, but that certain roles you lend yourself to, and then you put in the work. And there's what did Violette tell us that day at City Center? She said, everybody's a piece of the quilt, right? We're all a piece. And I think, for some people, a piece is, what's the step exactly? For others, it's what's the music exactly? I believe in big ideas. When Balanchine put me in Rubies, I loved Patty. I revered her. And I actually had a friend who said he wished I wasn't such a fan of Patty and Suzanne because it got in my way, right? But Balanchine himself would fight me on, well, how would you do it? How would you do it? And so that's an easy entry for me. If I see you doing what you've seen, I know there's more. And my job is to help you get there.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes. And so, we talked like dances at a gathering. We talk about how many shades of pink are there.
It's just like talking about music.
And
about being on the music or being kind of in the music.
When a great playwright has the delicate character deliver the hard truth, that's when your heart breaks. And so we've we've gone there.
There's a lot of, it's a lot of talk. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's so much in our world that looks a little bit like this.
I don't know what this is.
There's like, Tyler, you got it, and then I picture these moments of work that are just so extraordinary, about how we move together, what the possibilities are, about discussing it and then demanding it and saying no, a little more, think a little more.
Yeah, remember when we didn't have a high passe?
Remember that? That's so long ago. Who could remember that?
And now when you teach, I hear you talk about passe. I do. And I'm that's right?
But then also it's about possibility. So let's watch this for a moment and just see, what goes on here.
All right, once more, Nancy. And don't worry, I've got lots of film. Beautiful. So that's...
And then, just flying through the air with the greatest of ease, as they say. But there's just so much more. And there's the legacy.
Yes, and that's what I love about this moment, Tyler, is you and I can speak to this. One day, without even a rehearsal, I said to you in Vail, I remember Patty used to just fly from the wing all the way to center. And that night...
That's what happened.
And it's, that's the challenge is and that roll out of the fouettes, that was Suzanne. That's what I thought she did. I'm saying, do you remember? No, you don't remember. You weren't born. She did the biggest fourth. And then she left her head where it was and she rolled while looking at us backwards, and I would squeal and scream in delight. And now you do that. And it's not Suzanne, it's you. And so,
It's vaudeville, almost. I mean, Suzanne had, such a sense of vaudeville. And you used to talk to me about how you had a choice between ballet and your jazz, as you called it.
Your jazz.
And you said, my jazz. But that's a part of it, is having that range. You came with it, from the work on Broadway, obviously, but also all the rest, all those elements that built up to, and then, the profound qualities, which really come down to a different sort of bravery. And I think of that in the work that, you did and still do, like on Apollo, for instance, which is, the crucible in some ways of Balanchine's, progression as a choreographer. And we've been lucky enough in Vail to work on these ballets with you over and over again in different ways. And to see like you and Erman making your way through it.
And can we just look at the fact that we're not always going to do that like that. We're trying one version of this that Balanchine had me try with Misha, turned in standing leg, flexed hand like serenade, blocking the sun and the moon. But then there's also, and I know this because I used to have a picture of it in my old apartment of Suzanne and Peter, where she is in this beautiful turned out. So the myriad possibilities live within us. And I always feel like the greatest dancer either intuits it, knows it, uses it, chooses. I always want you, Tyler, to have that drawer and you open it and you choose at that moment, you know what, tonight, this.
Yeah, that's right. And, I think, I imagine not your happiest moment, probably, standing on that leg that way.
Wasn't mine.
And yet, maybe not, actually, because you always kind of dig in on stuff like that,
yeah,
right? Your walk sideways that we've talked about.
It's weird. It's, Apollo didn't feel comfortable to me. And it took so many years at Vail for it finally to click in. And I feel like, honestly, the turned in feels more normal to me. So when Heather, it's kind of like she gave me the permission to feel like I was right in it in a weird way, you know, like that simple, that simple change of the foot kind of felt more like me. And, you know, it is a little strange probably to other people, but to me it felt really comfortable. And that's like the thing I love the most, and I say this about Heather all the time, is that I feel like we speak this weird language where if somebody were to watch a rehearsal with us, like half of the time we understand what we're saying, and I don't even know if we don't even speak in full sentences all the time, but I just understand. And we can do a whole rehearsal through a text message, right? Sometime before like my debut in Swan Lake, where I will never forget starting that in Vail with you and Carla dancing the pas and me and Heather just watching. And
oh yeah, I did that with Carla. It was Swan School, right?
We called it Swan School. Yeah. So
well, Carla said that in Brazil they actually did a class called Swan School, and it was all about how you use your arms.
So we had seen Carla. So the story for people who are listening is we had seen Carla. Damian had Carla do Swan Lake, and we had seen a video of her doing it in Pacific Northwest, and I so admired it that when Tiler told me that the New York City Ballet told her she was going to do full-length Swan Lake that fall, we thought,
get to work.
We have Carla. And so Carla started doing Swan School with Tiler, but then Damian, who can't stop dancing, jumped in, and they did a kind of breathtaking, kind of scary, like, now I'm not sure I want to do it, in their street clothes, I think.
Yeah, we had a good time there, because it was, we're passing it on, that's the thing. And then you did just such a, extraordinary debut, and we were so proud of you on the stage afterwards. That's a very happy Odette, which is good.
And these things, they go so far beyond us in any real way. I mean, when Monique Minière did Swan Lake with New York City Ballet with Jacques Soto, I was asked to coach her in that, and I've never done Swan Lake. And it was such an honor. I loved working with her. And yet I feel slightly... Listen, when you were doing Sonnambula, we brought in Allegra Kent, right? Yeah. So I believe in more voices.
More voices.
And I've always wanted Natasha to work with Tyler.
Well, at Kennedy Center Honors, she weighed in on your other dances a little bit.
She did.
But it was all complimentary. So I don't think we,
No, at Kennedy Center Honors.
She said, "I like your girl."
She came up to me and she said, "I like your girl." And I said to her, "I don't know which part I like the most, that you like her or that you call her my girl."
Yeah. Well, there's no denying that, the relationship is a relationship, and it's the idea that, we share time in different ways.
And shoes.
And shoes at times, which is really, a big part of, understanding each other. That, dialect that you speak, whether in person or on text, has a lot to do with these chances that, we are together, and just having the chance. And then, as Heather said, I do still like to dance with you. I think that's Don Q, perhaps. Your partner hadn't arrived, so I had to do it, I suppose. I just wanted to do a good service. But, the profound things in the end are what kind of guide us. And, one of the things we're going to show in the digital festival is you doing the divertissement. With Jared. Here's a photo from that. And I know you and Heather worked on that so much. It's a role that she danced herself.
Oh, how beautiful.
With Mr. Balanchine, as she did in Rubies and in Apollo, so that passing on from Mr. Balanchine and Tchaikovsky Barada and all the things you work on in some ways, without saying this is what it is. It's an exploration of you. And I think that, we can get lost in how we do things, what the technique is. But in the end, it's, what we always talked about. The sky has to open. The time has to stop. All of those opportunities have to be taken. And that you have, punctuation in everything you do.
looking at this picture of Tyler and Jared, it's so beautiful. And, you know, Tyler had her own relationship with Midsummer. It's separate from me. But I love the idea that over a long lifetime, you plow the same field. And I remember one night with Apollo, you said to me, I think I found the solo. And it was humble. You didn't say to me, I found the solo. But it was like maybe 8 years into it. And I don't think audiences know that we have that relationship with our work. That, you know, Balanchine put me with Misha. I was Terpsichore, huge revival. And I felt not up to it. I didn't get it. I couldn't get my teeth into it. And I'm not sure I ever did. But I watched you that same night, and I turned to Damian on the wall in Vail and said to him, she found her Apollo. And I walked backstage, and and you said to me, I think I found, and I was like, wow, that's been since like 1979. So like in some weird way, that process of plowing that field. And I feel like with Midsummer, you do it in New York and you work with people and it's beautiful, and then you come back, and I feel like the gift you give me is the opportunity to still comment and inhabit one of the most exquisite and ethereal and ephemeral kind of that and you live it, and I see in it glimpses of all your great predecessors. You know, I see in our costume in New York, you know, Kent, Farrell, Watts, Peck, Ashley. You know, you see the names and you see the passing on, and you see him, and you see the possibility of what. Well, I mean, for me, it's what the hell would George Balanchine have done with Tiler Peck?
Oh. Well, you know, Tyler, there's so much more to do. Yeah. And, you know, in this time, you know, we're doing this digital festival in 2020 so that we can share some of the things we've done that we've talked about. But we're looking forward to being back in the room where it happens. And continuing to do what we do, as you often say. So we'll be back on the stages in New York and all around the world, and definitely in Vail next summer. And we haven't even talked about how this influences you as a new choreographer. But let's not forget that you did your first ballets in Vail. We're going to be showing Thousandth Orange as part of opening night, and everybody will get to see what only the people in Vail have seen so far. But that's a huge part of developing voice, what we've discussed today, and we are just so proud of you.
Thank you. I remember it was my birthday when you asked me to choreograph my first ballet.
It seemed like you couldn't say no. Yeah.
I will never forget. And I sat there and I said, you know, I was going through something very traumatic, like personally, and I thought, you know what, maybe this is the year to try something, you know, take another chance and try something. And then I remember there was a New York Times announcement, and I was like, okay, I guess I can't take it back now.
That's right. You started sending me the emojis of, you know, the hiding.
Yeah, you know, do something every day that scares you. Yeah. And you know, for me, selfishly, the honor of walking in a room with you and with other dancers, but you're particular, and you know that, and the honor and the obligation.
Yes.
Like, I have to be 100% honest in that room, and I have to find not only generosity about my thoughts, but generosity about others. I have to believe there's room for all thinking, and I have to open my heart and risk everything to ask you to risk everything. And it's really, you know, watching you teach now. You know, you had me come on your class, and I you know, I'm so your leadership voice in dance is going to really be a strong and vibrant and Californian and female and jazz and
all of it.
competition dancer and ballet and tap and actress and woman and
we're gonna close out this conversation and just watch Tyler and Jared do the very end of the Midsummer Divertissement Pas. But I will say that, you know, discussing how we pass it on has been a joy, and really focusing with you, Tyler, it all makes such sense. So thank you, and thank you for joining in this conversation, and for all of the dancing, and for all of the friendship. We love you.
I love you guys so much.
Now let's look at you here. Now punch. Beautiful. Come up and silhouette. Now come forward and let us look at you here. And now you look at his head and you go, oh, I want to widen that brow, and I'm going to sweep the feet away, and I'm going to dive onto your belly, and I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to get it. Perfect. It's perfect. Not sure I can do this. I would love to do it once more, only because I want Calvin to just make a sound. I want you to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as fast as you can. Because you're such a gentle man that I want a little bit of something hysterical right now. Don't bend them too much. Wait a second right there. How carefully do you take that hand? Yeah, there's my girl.
Wow, big difference.
That's gorgeous. Beautiful. Yeah. Do anything you want when you're doing it like that.
Exactly right.